Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar discussing night work and illumination standards. My name is Natalie Collins, and I am the Manager of Member Relations at the California Association of Wine Grape Growers. With harvest right around the corner and many grape growers conducting work at night, we thought this webinar would be a useful reminder of the unique set of hazards that can be remedied by proper planning, training, monitoring, and hazard correction. Presenting today will be Angelina Ceja, Director of Education at AgSafe. With over 10 years of experience creating multifaceted curriculum and teaching adult bicultural workers, Mrs. Ceja is responsible for curriculum development as well as managing AgSafe's team of educational specialists. She holds a master's degree in public administration and also holds her qualified applicator license through the California Department of Pesticide Regulation. So Angelina, thank you very much for joining us today and presenting on this important topic. Now real quick, I want to go over the format of the presentation. We will start with a 30 to 40 minute presentation and then open it up for questions and answers. So during the presentation, we will not be stopping to answer any questions, but I encourage you to type questions along the way. And you can do that by typing in the questions bar. Also, any question you ask will not be seen by others, and we will have you remain anonymous when we answer those questions. Lastly, a recording of this webinar will be available upon conclusion, and we will provide you with a link to AgSafe's page where the webinar will be hosted. So now, without further delay, I will turn this presentation over to Angelina.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I do have on the screen a webinar disclaimer that I just want you to take a minute or so to just read and look over. Natalie, thank you again for having us here to speak on this very important topic. So, like Natalie said, my name is Angelina Ceja. I'm the Director of Education for AgSafe, and we're here to present some very important information. First and foremost, just a brief overview of what will be covered in today's webinar. We will only be covering current regulations and best business practices for night safety and illumination. There will be no discussion on proposed standard changes and additions, but I do provide more information, a website that you can visit from the Department of Industrial Relations. There is also potentially on the call, in this webinar, Cal OSHA representatives. So if you feel comfortable sharing information, imparting information, if there is anything here, like Natalie mentioned, we will be going over question and answer at the end of the presentation, and we can cover information there. But we do encourage you to participate, and you are anonymous in your participation in this webinar. The items that we will be discussing in this webinar include the following. We will be talking a little bit about tractor and self-propelled equipment, those lighting requirements. We'll also talk about stationary lighting requirements, current lighting requirements, review your illness and injury prevention program, review of hazard identification and control, review and discuss emergency action plans, and a little bit on record keeping and documentation. Many agricultural operations conduct work at night, and as such need to take special precautions to protect their workers. Night work presents a unique set of hazards that can be remedied by proper planning, training, monitoring, and hazard correction. And we will be talking through some of these key points in the next few slides. First and foremost, tractor and self-propelled equipment. Under Title 8, Section 3441, all equipment must have a minimum of one headlight that illuminates the area in front of the equipment at least 50 feet. Now this is important. Oftentimes when you're working around tractors or other self-propelled equipment, harvesters, we have to recognize that making sure you're doing inspection of your equipment, making sure that the lighting is appropriate, making sure that the headlights are working is very important. Also, you need to make sure that there's a minimum of one rear light illuminating the back of the equipment. And again, these are minimum standards. Being able to be out there, if you're either the safety person or a supervisor or foreman, the person responsible for safety in your organization, you need to make sure that the equipment that's being used is in proper working order. Additional lighting also needs to be provided where the operation requires field adjustment or the operator's attention, such as employees working in the vicinity of any of this equipment. Incidents or accidents that occur typically occur right around where people are working. If there's a tractor or if there's a harvester, any time that there are workers in the vicinity, sometimes you know of the workers that are in the vicinity and sometimes you don't expect them there. It's really taking precautions as to where are your employees, where's your crew, and where are your workers at all times. When we're talking about stationary lighting requirements, this falls under Title 8, Section 3317. And it gives a very clear overview of the lighting requirements for certain areas. 0.5-foot candles for offices, locker room, storage yard. 1-foot candle for loading areas, warehouse, corridors, washrooms, spray booths, inspection. 2-foot candle for elevators, stairways, assembly areas, layout areas, and then 5-foot candles for engine rooms, processing areas, machine, woodworking shops, sheet metal work. And when adequate natural illumination or permanent artificial illumination cannot be made available to secure the safety of employees, suitable portable lights need to be provided. So oftentimes when you're out in the areas, you need to make sure that you're inspecting for where is either natural illumination an option or permanent artificial illumination an option. But making sure that you're assuring at minimum these levels in these areas, and if one isn't provided, that you're able to provide it and it's successful. Skylights, side windows, lamps, and other light accessories which provide necessary illumination need to be kept sufficiently clean, adjusted, and repaired as not to impair any illumination required for the safety of employees. And making sure that you look at the standard, examine your area, make sure that you know where the requirements are in terms of if I am working around offices, if I am in certain areas. We know that typically harvest work is done out in field, but that also doesn't, is there a possibility to have permanent lighting if that's an option, or what are you doing in terms of temporary lighting where you're ensuring the safety of all of your employees at all times? So now let's talk a little bit about our injury and illness prevention program. All companies with 10 or more employees have to have a written injury and illness prevention program. If you have less than 10 employees, you still need to have some sort of injury and illness prevention program. You want to make sure that you're reviewing and revising your own injury and illness prevention program. At minimum, we recommend at least once a year, if not more often, just depending on when you have changes to your work environment. And you definitely have to make sure that your injury and illness prevention program addresses work being done at night. Look at hazards and corrections for night harvest work. Examine what you are doing in terms of communication, and we'll talk a little bit about that. What are you doing in terms of worker health? And this also includes what type of personal protective equipment are you providing. If you're not able to eliminate the hazard, what type of protection are you providing to mitigate the hazard? Review your emergency action plan, which will look significantly different from something that happens at night to something that happens during the day. And then finally we'll talk a little bit about record keeping and documentation. So when we're talking about hazard identification and control, you want to ensure that you're reviewing the work site for potential hazards during the daylight hours. Oftentimes we see things during the day that might stay there at night. So making sure that during the daylight hours, if we are finding hazards such as tripping hazards, other things where employees can get hurt, that we are mitigating and eliminating those hazards during the daylight hours that can potentially pose a problem at night. But you're not only doing a hazard identification during the day, but you're also doing hazard identification at night, making sure that you're looking at your equipment that you're going to be using. If it's tractors or self-propelled equipment, making sure that you have the adequate lighting on those pieces of equipment, making sure that you're covering the safety procedures for those pieces of equipment. Are we doing daily inspections and making sure that all of the equipment is working properly? And ensuring that you have some sort of protocol and that you're providing specialized training when needed to mitigate or eliminate the hazard. Making sure that you're inspecting, again, all of your equipment, ensure that it's working properly, and that the safety mechanisms are in place. We talk a little bit about lighting. You also want to make sure that if you're using tape, reflective tape, that's also a great option. So we have the slow-moving signs on the pieces of equipment that are moving, but that there is the ability for people on the ground, your crews on the ground, to be able to easily identify the pieces of equipment that are moving around at night. We want to make sure that we are not only documenting when we've identified the hazard, but also when we've corrected it. Making sure that you're correcting any of the hazards that you are identifying, and then making sure that in terms of communication, that you are looping back with your employees about the hazards that you've identified, whether you've mitigated them, you've eliminated them, or whether they still pose a hazard and you've now just making sure that your employees know. In terms of effective communication, oftentimes this is a big issue when you're working at night, when you're harvesting at night, or doing any other activity for that matter at night that requires work, is that the effective communication piece. You want to make sure that you've established a procedure for all of your employees. And oftentimes we forget that they won't be able to necessarily be able to see each other, so you have to make sure that you are providing a form or a system of communication for the employees, in particular between supervisors and workers. If employees are working independently, what is the mechanism or the system that we are using to communicate with them? Are you using cell phones? Are you using radios? And then how often or regularly are you checking in with those employees to make sure that they're doing okay? If you decide to do this, you develop a buddy system to ensure that employees are being observed to prevent any injuries or illnesses. We've oftentimes noticed that with buddy systems, we have to ensure that employees understand what the buddy system is and that they're using it appropriately. So you might have it written into your IIPP or your injury or illness prevention program, but not everyone understands what that means. So making sure that the employees truly understand what the buddy system is there for and how it works. Making sure that you're closely supervising any new employees and providing employees sufficient time to become accustomed to night work conditions. We have to think about issues of fatigue, recognizing that people are typically up during the day and are asleep at night, so making sure that we are mindful of establishing some procedures to make sure that we're taking care of those employees who typically aren't used to working at night. We also recommend that you periodically test your systems of communication to determine how effective they are during night. In closing the loop of communication, we want to make sure that any procedures that we have are actually going to work. So please be sure to test your processes and your procedures periodically. Make sure that all employees understand how your system works. Oftentimes, the miscommunication piece, whether it be doing harvest in the daytime or doing harvest at night, has those consequences when we don't approach it properly because we maybe forgot to go ahead and test our systems and make sure that they work for not just a couple of employees, but all of our employees. And every situation will be unique. So making sure that a ranch can be in an isolated or a different place than something else than another ranch, and we have to make sure that we're accommodating for all of those needs or necessities. And that oftentimes can be an issue when we're talking about communication. When we discuss a little bit the health of workers, we have to make sure that we're providing whatever is necessary to the workers. So when you did a hazard identification and control, what were some of those hazards that you realized you needed to mitigate or eliminate? If we weren't able to eliminate completely, how do we mitigate it and how do we still protect our workers? Thinking about night work and night harvest, proper protective equipment, such as possibly using high visibility vests rated at class 2 or better, are recommended to be worn. You also maybe can do protective clothing. We've heard a lot of different ideas in terms of how do you protect your workers so that they are visible, especially your workers working on the ground that maybe aren't on those pieces of equipment. That you're able to be aware of where your workers are in terms of where that piece of equipment or pieces of equipment are in proximity to the workers that are on the ground, and being able to recognize the workers are there. Providing clean, cool, and potable water to make sure you're combating fatigue and dehydration. Oftentimes, we don't think of night work as necessitating the need to be drinking as much water as we would maybe during the day when it's hotter. But employees still need to be reminded to regularly drink water and take breaks, because fatigue and dehydration are a reality even during night. Making sure that you have at least one trained person for every 20 employees that's first aid CPR trained, present at the work site where the employees are working. We need to make sure that that person understands what to do in these situations. So typically a trained first aid CPR responder is your most appropriate bet. Making sure that you also talk to your employees about any pests, such as snakes, insects, and rodents, that will need to be identified, especially when they're doing night harvest and night work. Are there unique animals, rodents, pests in the area that they need to be more aware of than maybe somewhere else or during the daytime? So making sure that we're covering that information with our employees prior to them starting to work. Emergency action plan. You need to make sure that you've created a night-specific plan for responding to an emergency situation. Oftentimes, we forget that the local clinic where we typically would have taken someone who's maybe hurt or injured is not going to be open at night. So making sure that we're taking into consideration what are those medical services that are available in those ranches and in those areas that we're at, making sure that we're including maps of the areas where we're working. Are we considering any landmark visibility when directing emergency responders? I oftentimes hear about companies that utilize a process or a system where they've got a number of employees that are specifically trained to do certain things. The person that's going to provide the first aid, which is typically your first aid CPR trained individual, and then a person that's going to make the phone call, and then a person that's going to meet emergency services at the cross streets and then bring them in. And this is all great. We have to make sure that we are actually performing those drills, conducting a couple of drills, a couple of just scenarios during the night, making sure that at night those employees will be ready if there is an emergency to be able to respond to it appropriately and be able to guide emergency personnel to the person that's maybe injured or suffered an illness. And making sure that that is also highlighted in your emergency action plan. What is the plan? And conducting those drills on a regular basis. We typically recommend maybe when it isn't the most optimal time to do them is really when you want to do them, because that is going to be when sometimes we have those emergencies that crop up or come up. So training. It must reflect working conditions, including those unique to working at night. We have to make sure that we're conducting regular safety training at night and that we're documenting the content, the date and the time that you're providing the training, and that you want to make sure that you're including some sort of worker participation as well. With any effective training, it's not only about giving information, it's also about the understanding that the employee is going to have with that information. So making sure that your safety training is interactive, that you're asking questions of the employees, and that you make sure that they are knowledgeable and that they do understand the information that you're providing them and how to stay safe. Make sure that your employees are educated about all of the hazards specific, again, to their job and to the specific work site that they might encounter during night activity. So record keeping and documentation. Make sure that you have your IITP, your Injury and Illness Prevention Plan, available at every work site, and make sure that it includes the components of the work that you're doing at night as well. It needs to be made available to all of your employees. Make sure you're documenting the following, and we just talked a little bit about this. Your safety training. Who did the safety training? What time? What information was covered during your safety training? That you're documenting your hazard assessment and correction. Not just about when I have assessed the hazard, but also what I'm doing to correct the hazard or when it's been corrected. Any illnesses and injuries that may occur during our night activity. That you have a specific communication plan that has been communicated to your employees, whether it be your buddy system or it be some other form of communication, but that everyone understands your plan. Also, making sure that you're doing drills for your emergency action plan. And like I said, oftentimes at times when maybe it won't be the most convenient for you, but that's when typically incidents occur. So making sure that you're doing drills on a regular basis. And then making sure that you're also documenting any other pertinent information as you start your night harvest activity. So things to remember. Review your IITP to make sure that you are addressing any issues related to working at night and keeping your employees safe. Like I mentioned previously, review at least once a year, if not more often, or when other issues arise. Make sure that your employees are trained and that they're aware of the issues that they may encounter during night activity. For those of you that don't have a night emergency plan, make sure that you create one. And then the reminder to please document all of your information. So I think we've got maybe a couple of questions. that have come up. So if you want to take this time and write down some questions, please go ahead and do so, and we will start going through the questions and answering them.
Okay, so the first question says, is there an easy reference for converting foot candles to lumens, which is the metric used for all lights that are sold?
Yes, there is. So let me just look through my notes here real quick. So 107.6 lumens are equal to 10 foot candles. And we'll go ahead and we'll also type these questions up and have the answers available for you, so you're not having to remember throughout that number to you.
And the next question asks, is it required for us to provide a separate IIP for just night harvest, or is that something we can incorporate into our current IIP?
You can incorporate it into your current IIPP. It's, again, going to vary, determined on, I don't know what size your current IIPP is. Some people's IIPPs get really long. So just making sure you're calling out the night activity, whether it be in your current IIPP or, again, if you feel it necessary. But it can be included in your current IIPP, yes.
The next question asks, is there a required lighting for the porta potties used, and how far they need to be?
That is a good question. You need to be able to provide lighting. I would need to go look up if there is something specific, because in the current lighting standards, there isn't anything that calls out a specific distance. However, I do know the portable restroom situation is a real situation in terms of you need to make sure that the employees are able to get in there safely and out. So I can do a little bit of research, reach out to our Cal OSHA friends and see if someone can give us some guidance in terms of the issue with the lighting in the restrooms. I know some companies have tried different things in terms of internal lighting versus external lighting, and some of the issues, again, that arise with just having lighting that maybe isn't as reliable as we would like. So we can do a little research in terms of the exact, if there is an exact number, which there might not be, because I didn't find anything in my research. But I do know that this is a real issue. So we can do a little bit of research and, like I said, reach out to our friends at Cal OSHA and see if they can give us some information on that.
Perfect. And once again, we will be answering these questions and sending this to you in a document and providing the recording of the webinar and the PowerPoint as well. So the next question is, do you have any updates on the new proposed night regulations?
No, I don't. So this webinar was really just focused on current regulations, and unfortunately I do not have any updates. I did include a website link at the beginning of the PowerPoint presentation that has the most, at least the most current information I was able to find. But we definitely, if there is anything new, you know, we'll be looking into what we can do, again, with our partners at Cal OSHA, if there is the ability to do something maybe in the future, but we don't.
All right, we are still taking questions if you guys have them. Do employees need to wear headlamps?
So when either natural illumination or permanent artificial illumination cannot be made available to secure the safety of the employees, suitable portable lights can be provided, shall be provided. So to your question, I guess it just depends on the area that you're working on. And if you're not able to secure the safety of the employees, then some sort of suitable portable light can be provided or should be provided to them.
And is there a lumen requirement for headlights or headlamps?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay, we'll look into that question for you guys and include that in the answer sheet we provide.
We had a question of, is there visual examples of lighting? Maybe that individual, can you give me some examples. I'm not quite sure I understand the question. We will be providing a printout of our printing, of the presentation when we do the link to the webinar, to the recording, sorry. Okay, we had another question. If you provide employees headlamps and the packaging does not specify the lumen output, would it be best not to provide employees the headlamp? Again, it's your duty to keep your employees safe. So, and we were going to look into the lumen count, if there is even anything around headlamps or lumen count or lumen output. Again, as a best business practice, I would say if your employees are in need of something to be able to to be able to see at night, then you're providing something versus not providing anything. So for me, that question is more, and again, this is just me personally speaking, would be making sure that they have it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. So thank you. One of our CalOSHA representatives responded to a question that employers can use a light meter and measure the amount of light. I'm sorry. It needs to be measured at the place of work. Yes. So you can purchase light meters. You need to make sure that they're calibrated. Otherwise, again, you're not going to be able to determine whether or not they're going to be measuring the area properly. So we'll include this in the Q&A as well. Any other questions? Well, if there are no other questions, you guys do see Angelina's contact information on the screen there. You are also feel free to reach out to me at COG. And I think that will conclude our webinar, and we'll get you guys an email this afternoon with a link to everything that we have promised. Yes. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.